Have you ever felt deeply affected by something someone said, even when you knew it wasn't true? Why does a single word, a look, or a moment from someone else have the power to ruin your entire day, or even your life? What if I told you that the real reason lies not in them, but in you, in a hidden part of your mind that you've been avoiding? In this video, we'll uncover a spiritual and psychological truth that most people will never hear in their lifetime, the truth about your shadow self. Based on the profound teachings of Carl Jung, you'll discover why your deepest emotional pain, triggers, and reactions are messages from your unconscious mind and how they can be the key to your freedom. By the end of this video, you'll not only understand what's been controlling you behind the scenes, but you'll also gain the tools to take your power back. We'll guide you through real exercises to help you confront your hidden fears, stop taking things personally, and finally live with authenticity and peace. Stay until the end, because what you're about to learn might just change the way you see yourself forever. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please click the subscribe button and ring the notification bell to stay updated on all our latest content. An introspective journey, facing the shadow within. Let me ask you something truly personal. Are you brave enough to look at the parts of yourself you've spent years trying to hide? Because if you are, I want to invite you to a deeply transformational exercise. And no, this isn't just some feel-good theory or surface-level self-help trick. This is raw. This is real. This is where healing begins. Right now, take a moment. Close your eyes if it helps. Think of anyone who stirs something unpleasant inside you. Maybe it's someone who betrayed your trust. Maybe it's someone who talks down to you, pushes your buttons, or constantly triggers your deepest insecurities. Maybe it's someone you simply can't stand, but can't quite figure out why. Now, write their name down, and underneath it, start listing the traits about them that irritate you the most. Are they arrogant? Manipulative, self-absorbed, passive-aggressive, cold? Whatever it is, be honest, even if it feels uncomfortable, especially if it feels uncomfortable. Now comes the part that most people skip, because this is where it gets hard, but also where it gets beautiful. Ask yourself, with a soft and open heart, have I ever been like that too? Maybe not to the same extreme, maybe not publicly, but have I ever, even for a moment, shown those same tendencies in my private thoughts, in my actions, in the way I've treated someone when I was hurting or afraid? This isn't about shaming yourself. This is about awakening. Write down what you discover, even if it stings. Then reflect. Instead of hating those traits in others or in yourself, what would it look like to integrate them with compassion? Could that arrogance simply be misdirected confidence that you can reclaim and reshape into something empowering? Could that manipulation be a sign of unmet needs or a deep hunger for control born out of fear? This, my friend, is the very first courageous step toward what Carl Jung called individuation, the sacred and often painful path to becoming whole. Because healing doesn't mean becoming perfect. It means becoming real. And that begins when we stop rejecting parts of ourselves and start reclaiming them with love. True freedom is found in radical acceptance. Jung, in his timeless wisdom, didn't sugarcoat it. We are not truly free until we integrate our shadow. As long as we keep burying the parts of us we've deemed unacceptable, the world outside will keep poking at our wounds. People will keep triggering us. Life will keep spinning us in circles. Because what we deny within, we attract without. And isn't that the exhausting truth? How often do we try to fix things by controlling others, rearranging our environment, or walking away from uncomfortable situations thinking that will give us peace? But peace doesn't come from rearranging the furniture of our lives. It comes from cleaning out the corners of our souls. So let's get real for a second. If you've made it this far, if you're still reading, I believe you already sense this truth in your gut, that the only way nothing and no one can ever truly affect you again is by making peace with yourself. All of yourself. But Jung doesn't stop there. He urges us to dig deeper, beyond the masks we wear, beyond even our shadow, because behind it all, behind our fears, our wounds, our facades, is the self. Yourself, the true, eternal core of who you are. And it's been waiting for you to come home. The ego, our greatest illusion, our deepest trap. But there's a gatekeeper standing between you and that self. Its name? The ego. Now, don't get me wrong. The ego isn't evil. It's a part of us that tries to protect us, to help us survive in a chaotic world. But left unchecked, the ego becomes a prison. It whispers things like, I have to be right. I have to be admired. I have to be seen as successful. I can't be weak. I can't be wrong. I have to prove myself. And you know what? It gets exhausting living like that. We've all met people whose egos are so inflated they can barely breathe around others without seeking validation. And yet, they're often the most fragile. Because when you're deeply attached to an image of who you think you are, any threat to that image feels like a threat to your very existence. Have you ever noticed how the people who crave the most praise are often the ones who fall apart with the slightest criticism? That's not strength. That's fear disguised as pride. True strength, soul. Strength comes from knowing who you are beyond your ego. It comes from not needing to perform for love, not needing to explain your worth, not needing to chase anyone's approval. Ego check, an exercise in emotional honesty. Let's go even deeper now. Think back to a moment, maybe recently, when you felt deeply offended. Someone said something that stung. Maybe they dismissed you, mocked you, or just ignored your presence. Now ask yourself, what part of me felt attacked? Was it your pride? Your sense of intelligence? Your appearance? Your role as a parent? Your moral values? Now here's the uncomfortable question. If that part of me vanished, if I lost that status or trait, would I still know who I am? Would I still believe I'm worthy of love, respect, and happiness? Write your answer down. Be raw. Be real. Because here's the beautiful truth. When you realize you don't need to protect your image, you stop giving others the power to hurt you. You stop reacting to life. And you start living it. The mirror effect, when others reflect what we hide. Carl Jung dropped one of the most transformative psychological bombs when he introduced the concept of projection. It's simple, yet soul-shaking. What irritates you about others often reveals what's unresolved within yourself. Let that sink in. That arrogant coworker? Maybe they reflect the self-assurance you've never allowed yourself to express. That overbearing neighbor? Maybe they mirror your fear of being too much, too loud, too seen. We project not because we're bad people, but because we're scared. Scared of facing the things we've exiled from our identity. So, next time someone triggers you, stop and ask, what are they teaching me about myself? Maybe they're a mirror, not a monster. And maybe, just maybe, their presence in your life is the invitation you've been avoiding, to finally see yourself fully, to embrace your contradictions, to walk into your wholeness. Your liberation begins here. Do you want to be untouchable? Not in a cold, distant way, but in a sacred, powerful way that says, I know who I am. I've met my darkness. I've befriended it. And now, nothing outside of me controls me. That's the kind of freedom Jung invites us into. It's not the easy path, but it's the path of truth. And for those who walk it, life begins to shift. Peace comes not from the absence of chaos, but from the presence of integration. Love deepens, judgment fades, and joy, real, unshakable joy, becomes your natural state. So the question is, are you ready? Because the moment you say yes to your shadow is the moment you start becoming whole. The influence of Freud and other psychologists, a deeper look into the subconscious battle within. Even though Carl Jung eventually broke away from Sigmund Freud, both men pioneers in their own right agreed on one profound truth: much of our pain, confusion, and self-sabotage originates from the subconscious. It's not the outside world that hurts us most. It's what we carry inside, silently, in the dark corners of our mind where few dare to look. Freud introduced the concept of the ID, that wild, untamed part of us filled with repressed desires, raw instincts, and chaotic urges. It's the primal self, unfiltered and unashamed, constantly at odds with the polished persona we show the world. Now, when we take Freud's model and intertwine it with Jung's teachings, a clear pattern emerges, one that most of us are living out every single day without even realizing it. The ego, according to Jung, is our mask. It's the curated image we present to others, what we want people to see. But beneath that mask lies the shadow, holding everything we've denied, suppressed, or rejected about ourselves. And deeper still is Freud's ID, our rawest, truest impulses. So what does this mean for us? It means that true freedom isn't found in perfection or control. It's found in integration, in choosing to stop running from ourselves, in standing still, turning inward, and saying, I will face all of me, even the parts I was taught to be ashamed of. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons helpful, please comment number 1 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Introspective exercise, connecting with the you that has no fear. Let's pause right here. I want you to try something that could change the way you see yourself. Close your eyes. Take a deep, intentional breath. Inhale. Exhale slow and steady. Now ask yourself this one simple, powerful question. If the world couldn't judge me, who would I truly be? Let it rise from within you. Don't analyze. Don't filter. Just listen, and then write it down, whatever came to your heart first. It could be a word, a vision, a feeling, or a full sentence. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it came from the part of you that has no fear. Now reflect. How much of that version of you are you showing the world? Chances are, most of us hide far more than we reveal. Why? Because judgment is a powerful force. Because somewhere along the way, we learned that being fully ourselves was dangerous, that we'd be too much or not enough, that we'd be abandoned, laughed at, or unloved. But isn't that a tragedy? To live a life that isn't even ours just to be accepted? This exercise isn't just a mental game. It's a mirror. It shows us how much of our existence has been shaped by fear instead of freedom. And it reminds us that our true self, the one behind all the layers, is still alive, still waiting. The power of individuation, becoming whole, not perfect. Jung described the process of becoming whole as individuation, the lifelong journey of weaving together every part of our inner world, the ego, the persona, the shadow, the self. It's not about cleansing ourselves of bad traits. It's about finally realizing that nothing in us is inherently bad, only misunderstood. Perfection is a lie we were sold. Wholeness is the truth that can set us free. When you begin this path of individuation, something miraculous starts to happen. The things that once shook you, criticism, rejection, manipulation, begin to lose their grip. Why? Because you're no longer rooted in needing approval. You've met yourself fully. And now, no one can define you, because you've already defined yourself. Imagine this. Someone insults you, but instead of reacting in anger or shame, you simply feel compassion either for them or for the part of you that once needed their approval. Or life throws a storm your way, but instead of falling apart, you face it with quiet strength. You've seen your darkness. You've embraced it. So no external chaos can destabilize you. That is true inner peace. Not a life without storms, but a soul that's weathered them and still stands tall. Samuel's story. When everything falls apart, the truth rises. Samuel had always believed he was just An ordinary man, hardworking, loyal, doing what society expected. On the outside, he checked every box. On the inside, though, there was always this hollow space, like a whisper saying, "Something's missing." But he ignored it. Like so many of us, he stayed busy, until one day, the roles he'd clung to started unraveling. It began with his job, a place he had poured years of his life into. On a Friday afternoon, with no warning, his manager asked him to step into the office. The words were clinical, robotic. "Your services are no longer needed." No gratitude, no explanation. Just a cold dismissal, as if he were nothing more than a replaceable part. He walked out of the building in a fog, barely able to breathe. He checked his phone, hoping for some comfort, some reminder that he mattered. But instead, a message from his girlfriend flashed on the screen. "I need time. I don't know who you are. I feel like you've never been completely honest with me, or even with yourself." The words hit harder than he expected. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Samuel sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel, tears welling up, but not from anger, from a strange, aching emptiness. For the first time, he realized he wasn't just grieving the loss of his job or his relationship, he was grieving the loss of the identity he had clung to for years. That night, unable to sleep, he wandered through his neighborhood, pulled by something he couldn't name. His feet eventually led him to an old second-hand bookstore, a place he'd never noticed before. Something about it felt almost sacred, like it had been waiting for him. Inside, tucked between weathered shelves, a book caught his eye, Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung. He picked it up and flipped it open to a random page. "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." He froze. Those words pierced through every defense, every story, every excuse. Samuel closed the book, holding it to his chest, and for the first time in his life, he stopped running. What if it wasn't bad luck? What if everything that had happened to Samuel, the job loss, the breakup, the overwhelming sense of emptiness, wasn't just bad luck or the cruelty of life? What if it wasn't about what others had done to him, but about something within him, something he had ignored for far too long? For the first time in his life, that thought didn't scare him, it intrigued him. With the book clutched to his chest like a lifeline, he walked back home through the quiet streets, his mind spinning. There was a strange sense of gravity pulling at his thoughts, as if he were standing on the threshold of something important, something that could either break him or awaken him. He spent the entire night reading. Page after page, Jung's words didn't just inform him, they shook him. They reached into the darkest parts of his soul, parts he hadn't even realized existed. Jung spoke of the shadow, that hidden side of our personality, where we bury everything we think is unacceptable. Fears, insecurities, forbidden desires, childhood pain, rage, lust, envy, all the things we pretend don't exist in us, but never truly go away. And the more Samuel read, the more he realized that he had been living a lie. He had always despised arrogant people, their loudness, their certainty, their boldness. But now, Jung offered him a piercing truth. What irritates us most in others often reflects what we deny within ourselves. The realization felt like a punch to the gut. Could it be that the reason arrogant people upset him so deeply was because he had repressed his desire to be confident? Behind his humility, there was a fear of taking up space, of being seen, of stepping into his power. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for a notebook. He wrote down the names of the people who had bothered him the most in his life. One by one, he described what it was about them that had triggered him: arrogant, fake, cold, controlling. Then he sat back and stared at the page. His chest tightened. Could he be like that? Could he have spent his life hiding behind politeness and obedience, not because he was virtuous, but because he was afraid? Afraid of being too much, afraid of being rejected, afraid of becoming the very things he'd been taught were wrong. At that moment, everything started making sense. His girlfriend's parting words echoed in his mind. "I feel like you've never been completely honest with me, or even with yourself." If you are still watching this video and find these lessons helpful, please comment number 2 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. And for the first time, he didn't feel anger. He felt grief. Not because she had left, but because she had seen him in ways he had refused to see himself. The dream, a mirror of the soul. That night, as his body gave in to sleep, Samuel had a dream he would never forget. He was in a dark room, silent, still, and standing across from him was himself. But this version of himself didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, watching him. The eyes were familiar but piercing, almost like they could see through every layer of falsehood he had ever built. The atmosphere felt thick with something ancient and sacred, as if he were facing a forgotten truth. He woke up, gasping. His body was tense. His heart was pounding. But it wasn't fear, it was awareness. That figure in the dream wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't something to run from. It was him, his shadow. The version of himself he had spent a lifetime hiding from. The courage to face the truth. As the sun rose, Samuel got out of bed, his mind still haunted by the dream. He walked into the kitchen, made coffee, and glanced at the notebook again. It felt heavier now, as if it were no longer just paper and ink, but a confession, a mirror, a key. He opened a fresh page and wrote down a new question. What am I most afraid to admit about myself? And without thinking, without censoring, he let his hand write. I'm afraid of being rejected. I'm afraid of being seen as weak. I'm afraid of not being enough. He read the words over and over, each one like a crack in the armor he had worn for decades. It was the first time in his life he had dared to speak those fears aloud, even to himself. But something unexpected happened. Instead of shame, he felt a strange calm. Not joy, not sadness, but honesty. As if, for the first time in years, he wasn't hiding anymore. That afternoon, he took a walk, no phone, no destination, just his feet and his thoughts. The city felt different, quieter, like he was seeing it with new eyes. He remembered another line from Jung, what you resist, persists. And suddenly, he understood. All his life, he had resisted fear, resisted anger, resisted insecurity. And because of that resistance, they had ruled him from the shadows showing up in his relationships, his job, his silence, his failures. But now, he had written them down, named them, faced them. And in doing so, he had taken the first step toward mastery, the mirror ritual, making the unconscious conscious. When he returned home, he stood in front of the mirror. This time, he didn't look away. With his voice shaking but steady, he read the words from his notebook aloud. I'm afraid of being rejected. I'm afraid of being seen as weak. I'm afraid of not being enough. Each phrase hit him like a wave. His throat tightened. Tears welled up. But with every word, a layer of weight lifted from his chest. He wasn't breaking down. He was breaking open. Suddenly, he saw the figure from the dream again in his mind. But it wasn't a threat. It was familiar. It was him. It was the self he had abandoned, standing in the dark, waiting to be seen. That night, the dream returned. The same room, the same silence. But this time, the figure looked straight into his eyes and spoke with his voice. Now, you see me. Samuel awoke with tears on his face and a new sensation in his chest, not fear, but freedom, crossing the threshold. The next morning, he didn't check his phone. He didn't rush to fill the silence. He didn't numb himself with distractions. Instead, he stepped outside, into the soft morning light, and walked. Not to get anywhere, not to fix anything, but because something in him had changed. A door had opened in his mind, and he had finally stepped through. And somewhere deep within, he knew this was just the beginning. The shadows whisper, awakening the self. As Samuel walked through the quiet streets, one of Jung's teachings echoed through his mind like a sacred mantra. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. It sent a ripple through his soul. The world had taught him to chase the light, to strive for positivity, and to perform goodness for the approval of others. But no one had ever taught him to turn around and walk into the darkness inside him to meet the part of himself that had been waiting in silence, aching to be seen. If the shadow had always been there, watching from the corners of his mind, then maybe, just maybe, it wasn't a monster at all. Maybe it was a message. So he did something he'd never done before. He took out his notebook, that sacred space that had become his mirror, and he wrote, "Dear Shadow, what have you been trying to tell me all this time?" Then, as if the dam inside him had broken, he let the words flow, not from his logical mind, but from somewhere deeper, raw. "I've always been here, waiting for you to see me. I'm not your enemy. I just want to be accepted. I've made you angry, so you'd pay attention. I've influenced your choices, so you'd finally listen. I am not here to harm you, I am the truth you've buried." Samuel read the words in stunned silence. His hands trembled. This wasn't some poetic journaling exercise. This was communion, a soul-to-soul conversation between the man he had always pretended to be and the one he had hidden away in fear. His throat tightened. For years, he had believed his shadow was something to conquer, a flaw to fix, a burden to hide. But in that moment, he saw the truth. His shadow was his ally, a part of him that had never given up trying to reach him. He breathed in slowly, deeply. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't running from himself. And that single act of staying, of facing what he had long rejected, became the sacred beginning of a transformation no one could take from him, crossing the threshold of self-truth. Samuel woke the next morning with an unfamiliar stillness. Not the dull numbness of apathy, but a real, tender quiet. Like his soul had been rearranged in the night. He was no longer the man who, just days ago, had tried to explain away his pain by blaming the world. Now he understood something profound. His shadow wasn't the problem. His denial of it was. He sat with his notebook, rereading everything he had written over the past few days. Each sentence felt like a spiritual landmark, a truth too heavy to carry before, now sitting gently in his hands. There was no turning back now. He had opened the door to himself, and he couldn't unsee what he had seen. He glanced at the mirror, remembering the dream, the figure in the dark, the one who once filled him with fear. But now he felt curious. He wanted to know more. He wanted to understand the feelings he had spent a lifetime repressing: anger, grief, jealousy, even desire. He wanted to know what lived behind his silence. So he sat at his desk and wrote again. This time, a letter, not to a person, but to his shadow. "Dear Shadow, I know you've been here all this time. I know you've been trying to speak, and I refuse to listen. But I'm listening now. I'm ready. Speak to me." He sat still after writing, unsure of what would come. But then, without planning, without effort, his hand moved, as if something deep within him had finally been permitted to speak. "I've always been here. I am not your shame. I am your reflection. The part of you you buried to be loved. I am your pain. I am your power. And I only wanted you to come home to yourself." Samuel's breath caught in his throat. These words weren't coming from his intellect. They were coming from a place that knew him better than he knew himself. A part that had watched him perform, strive, and people please, while quietly holding the pieces of his truth. He had spent a lifetime trying to be the good one, the dependable son, the loyal partner, the agreeable colleague. But in doing so, he had banished his fire, his voice, his authenticity. And now, that fire was returning, rewriting the narrative. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the city. A city that had once felt suffocating, too fast, too fake, too loud. But now, he saw it differently. The noise outside no longer drowned him, because the real noise had always come from within the mental prison he had built by trying to be someone he wasn't. And now that he had met his shadow, the bars were crumbling. He returned to his desk with purpose and closed his eyes. He visualized the dream again, the dark room, the silent figure. Only this time, he didn't recoil. He stepped forward. He looked directly into the figure's eyes and whispered, "I'm ready." The figure spoke in his voice, "You are more than you think. But to become who you truly are, you must stop lying to yourself." Samuel felt the words like thunder in his chest. They weren't harsh. They were true. And truth, though heavy, felt like liberation, letting go of the mask. He opened his phone. There, unsent, were the messages to his ex, apologies, defenses, manipulative justifications disguised as honesty. He deleted them all. He didn't need to rewrite the story to look like the victim anymore. Instead, he wrote something simple, and from the heart, "Now I understand what you meant. Thank you for opening my eyes." He sent it not to seek closure, but to affirm his awakening. This was no longer about anyone else. This was about coming clean with himself. Then, on a fresh page, he wrote 3 questions that felt like keys to his future. What do I want, without fear of others' judgment? What part of me have I been hiding for far too long? How can I live authentically from this moment forward? He didn't rush to answer. Just asking them already felt like a revolution, seeing the world through a new lens. That afternoon, he went for a walk again. But the world had changed. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons helpful, please comment on number 3 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Or maybe he had. Every person he passed felt like a mirror. He saw a man yelling into his phone and recognized the rage he had silenced in himself for years. He saw a woman walking with her shoulders hunched and remembered how small he used to make himself feel to avoid conflict. He saw a child spinning with laughter in the sunlight, and something inside him ached. That joy used to live in me too, he thought. I want it back. In that moment, he understood one of Jung's most powerful truths. Everything we see outside is a reflection of what we carry inside. Becoming whole, he stopped at a park bench, closed his eyes, and sat still with everything he had uncovered. The shadow hadn't vanished. It was still with him. But now, it felt like a companion, not a threat. He wasn't broken. He wasn't lost. He was becoming. The next morning, Samuel awoke once more, but this time, not to the same gnawing dread he had lived with for years. There was no heavy fog, no low-grade panic about the day ahead. Instead, there was presence, calm, a kind of silent power that came from knowing who he was, not perfect but whole. He looked down at his hands. They looked the same, but he knew he wasn't the same man anymore. He had stared into his darkness, and instead of turning away, he stayed. The test of transformation, where theory meets life. The day before had felt like walking through a dream, but one clearer than waking life had ever been. For the first time, Samuel had seen the world not through the lens of fear or judgment, but through reflection. Everyone around him, he realized, was a mirror, showing him pieces of himself, some healed, some still hidden. But now, standing in his kitchen with a warm mug of coffee in hand, the silence of the morning held a question. How do I live this truth, not just know it? Insight was beautiful. Awareness was powerful. But Samuel understood that real transformation didn't live in theory. It lived in the way he responded to life, and life didn't make him wait long for a test. The email. An old wound reopens. As he sat down to check his email, his eyes landed on a familiar name, his former boss. A flicker of heat rose in his chest. That old wound pulsed. The memory of being discarded like an old tool returned. The injustice, the silence, the cold dismissal. His hand hovered over the mouse, heart picking up speed. He clicked. The message was brief, emotionless. Samuel, we need you to come to the office. There's a problem with some files that only you can fix. That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement of the pain. No recognition of what they had done to him. Just a demand disguised as a favor. Before, this would have lit a fire inside him, rage, resentment, the bitter taste of pride demanding justice. He would have shot back a sharp response, something biting, something that screamed, "You don't get to use me anymore." But not today. Instead, he closed his eyes and asked the question that had become his inner compass. What part of me feels affected by this? The answer came like a whisper from deep within. Your ego. His ego was aching for recognition. It wanted the boss to admit fault, to grovel, to say, "You were right. We were wrong." His ego wanted justice in the form of validation. But Samuel wasn't a prisoner to that part of himself anymore. He exhaled slowly and typed a calm, four-word response, "I'll come by later." The return, calm in the storm. When he arrived at the office, nothing had changed but he had. The hallway still smelled the same. The desk he once called his own still sat coldly under fluorescent lights. And his boss, still distant, still clipped, still emotionally frozen. No thank you, no eye contact, just files shoved into his hand. But Samuel didn't feel small. He didn't feel invisible. He felt curiously free, because in that moment he understood something profoundly liberating. This wasn't personal. His boss wasn't trying to hurt him. He was simply acting from his limitations, his fears, his unhealed places. And instead of bitterness, Samuel felt something wild and unexpected, compassion. He completed the task without needing acknowledgement, without waiting for gratitude, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't doing it to prove anything. He was doing it because he chose to. When he stepped outside, the city air felt cool against his skin, fresh, cleansing. And that's when it hit him. He was free, not because the world had changed, but because he no longer needed it to. Shifting landscapes, the afterglow of inner work. Over the next few days, Samuel began to see the changes in himself, not just feel them. Life still brought challenges, but his reactions had changed. He no longer exploded with emotion or collapsed in sadness. What used to feel like crashing waves now felt like light ripples on a calm ocean. He was no longer ruled by his past or by people's opinions. The world had lost its power to shake him. Then came a message he hadn't expected, from his ex-girlfriend. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. Maybe one day we can talk." Once, those words would have sent him spiraling, second-guessing, fantasizing, clinging to hope. But now, he simply smiled. There was no aching need to respond perfectly, no desire to fix the past or force a future. He simply replied, with truth and grace, "When that day comes, I'll be here. I hope you're doing well." And that was enough. He didn't need to chase love. He didn't need to rewrite the story, because he had found something far greater, peace. The final dream, unity at last. That night, he returned once more to the dream, the dark room that had haunted him for weeks. But this time, it was different. The figure across the room, the silent, watchful shadow, was no longer separate from him. It didn't just mirror his features. It was him. And for the first time, the figure smiled. So did Samuel. He woke with a knowing that couldn't be unlearned. He had crossed the final threshold. The journey that began with confusion and pain had brought him home to himself. Samuel's story, a journey shared by many. Samuel's journey isn't just one man's story. It's a reflection of what happens when any one of us dares to face the truth inside. Carl Jung once said, "No one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And that's exactly what Samuel did. He stopped running. He turned around. He met the very parts of himself he had spent a lifetime avoiding. And in doing so, he discovered something sacred, that our shadow is not our enemy. That healing isn't found in denial, but in integration. That freedom doesn't come from controlling the world, but from understanding ourselves. Understanding the stages of transformation, Jung's path to wholeness. To truly appreciate the depth of Samuel's transformation, we must look at the psychological stages. He passed through each one mirroring Carl Jung's teachings on individuation. The collapse of the persona, Samuel's job loss and breakup, shattered the false self he had built to survive, the obedient employee, the nice guy, the man who did everything right but felt everything wrong. The confrontation with the shadow through dreams, journaling, and silence, he met the parts of himself. He had rejected anger, fear, insecurity, pride, and realized they weren't monsters. They were messengers. The death of the ego. When faced with his boss again, he let go of his need for validation. When his ex reached out, he didn't cling. The ego lost its grip, and with it, the suffering it caused. The integration, the final dream, symbolized unity. The shadow was no longer a separate threat. It was accepted, embraced, and made whole. Samuel didn't just understand who he was, he became who he was. The message for us all, Samuel's story, reminds us that we all carry shadows. We all wear masks. But the moment we stop pretending, the healing begins. So ask yourself, what part of me have I rejected? What anger, fear, or desire have I buried to be accepted? What would happen if I turned around and faced my own shadow? The answers might shake you. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons helpful, please comment on number 4 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. But they will also set you free. Would you like me to now continue with an epilogue or expand on the psychological breakdown of Samuel's transformation for your audience? 1. The unconscious life, the illusion of control. Before everything fell apart, before the walls of his carefully constructed world began to crumble, Samuel lived in what Carl Jung would call a state of psychological unconsciousness. On the surface, his life seemed stable, even admirable. He had a steady job, a committed partner, and a reputation for being dependable. But what he didn't realize, what many people don't realize, is that this version of himself wasn't truly him. It was a mask, a role, a carefully curated identity shaped by what others expected of him and what he thought he needed to be to belong. He believed his worth came from his productivity, that love had to be earned, that being a good person meant hiding anything dark, messy, or inconvenient about himself, and in that illusion, he was far from alone. This unconscious way of living is shockingly common. Many people, without even realizing it, live their entire lives tethered to external validation. They mistake approval for peace, achievement for meaning, applause for identity. But Jung warned us of a dangerous truth. What you resist not only persists but grows in power. And what we deny within ourselves, our fear, our anger, our unmet needs, doesn't disappear. It simmers beneath the surface. And eventually, it explodes. Not as a coincidence, but as fate. That's exactly what happened to Samuel. His job didn't just end, it collapsed, under the weight of years of emotional avoidance. His relationship didn't just dissolve, it revealed the inner emptiness he'd never dared to face. The life he thought was solid turned out to be hollow. It wasn't just a bad season, it was his unconscious demanding to be heard. And though it hurt deeply, life had given him a gift, disguised as a loss, a chance to wake up. 2. The shadow, the inner enemy, that's a messenger. In Jungian psychology, one of the most vital transformative ideas is the concept of the shadow. The shadow represents all the parts of ourselves we've tried to ignore, suppress, or exile: the anger, the jealousy, the fears, the selfish impulses. The desires we were taught were shameful. Samuel had always seen himself as a peaceful man, rational, kind, easy to get along with. But once the cracks began to show, and he was brave enough to look beneath the surface, he uncovered a different story. There, buried in the corners of his mind, was a different Samuel. A Samuel who felt rage when disrespected. A Samuel who craved recognition but was ashamed to admit it. A Samuel who feared rejection so deeply that he never truly allowed himself to be seen. And here's the twist. The more he had denied these parts of himself, the more power they gained over him. That's why he used to explode when someone dismissed his contributions. That's why he felt crushed when someone didn't acknowledge his effort. It wasn't because people had power over him. It was because he was at war with his truth. When we ignore the shadow, we don't neutralize it. we surrender to it without knowing. It becomes the unseen puppet master, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. It shows up in our defensiveness, our addictions, our irrational reactions, our passive aggressiveness, our burnout. But then something powerful happened. Samuel stopped seeing his shadow as a villain, and he started listening to it as a messenger. That shift, subtle but seismic, was the beginning of real healing. 3. Integrating the shadow, the power of acceptance. The turning point in Samuel's transformation wasn't some grand external event. It was an inner decision, the moment he chose to stop running and finally face himself. He did what many fear to do. He confronted the voice in his head, the part of himself that trembled, the part that screamed, the part that felt broken. And he asked a question not many are brave enough to ask: what am I most afraid to admit about myself? The answers that emerged weren't dramatic, but they were real. I'm afraid of being rejected. I'm afraid of not being enough. I'm afraid of being seen as weak. He wrote them down. And then, perhaps even more courageously, he stood in front of the mirror, looked himself in the eyes, and spoke those words out loud. Not as a confession, but as an act of liberation. It may seem like a small thing, but don't underestimate the power of this moment. Verbalizing our deepest truths breaks the spell of shame. It pulls our fears out of the shadows and into the light where they lose their control over us. Therapists use this technique often. Why? Because there's something transformational about naming our pain. When Samuel looked into his own eyes and said, "I'm afraid of not being enough," he wasn't collapsing. He was becoming whole. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This is the heart of Samuel's journey. He didn't destroy his shadow, he embraced it. He didn't erase his fears, he acknowledged them, and in doing so, he reclaimed his power. He stopped trying to be perfect and chose, instead, to be honest. He stopped hiding behind emotional masks and learned to sit with discomfort until it turned into understanding. That is real emotional maturity. That is the start of peace that doesn't depend on circumstance. That is the transformation Jung pointed toward, and Samuel lived. 4. The real test, confronting the outside world. One of the most powerful moments in Samuel's journey wasn't a breakthrough that happened in silence or solitude. It was the moment life challenged his transformation. It came quietly, disguised in something as mundane as an email from his old boss, the very man who had dismissed him without empathy, who had not explained, no acknowledgement of Samuel's dedication. The man who once symbolized everything that had made Samuel feel small, overlooked, and powerless. In the past, this message would have lit a fire of fury in Samuel's chest. His ego would have flared, demanding to be heard, craving vindication. He might have written a bitter reply, or ignored it completely, pride wrapped in silence. But this time, he paused. He breathed. He observed the reaction rising in him instead of becoming it. And then he asked the question that had become his compass: what part of me is reacting? The answer came gently. It's your ego, the part that still aches for recognition. But now, Samuel no longer let that part of himself take the lead. He acknowledged it, and then chose differently. He responded calmly, without emotion, without spite. "I'll come by in the afternoon." That choice, simple as it seemed, marked a defining moment in his evolution. Because this is where true healing shows itself. Not in what we say we understand, not in what we journal or read or meditate on, but in how we show up when the old triggers return. This is the battlefield of growth, not inside a therapy room or on a mountain retreat, but in real-life moments that used to knock us off center. And Samuel passed that test. He returned to the office. He faced the same man, the same environment, the same dynamic. But he wasn't the same. He didn't seek approval. He didn't carry the burden of needing to be seen. He simply did what was asked, peacefully, confidently, and without attachment. In that moment, He achieved something many people spend a lifetime chasing: emotional freedom. He no longer needed others to act a certain way for him to feel secure. He no longer gave his power away to their behavior. That is true mastery, not being untouched by life's difficulties, but being unshaken by them. 5. Compassion, the final step in shadow integration. And then something unexpected happened, something beautiful. Samuel didn't walk away feeling triumphant or superior. He didn't gloat internally or pat himself on the back for his restraint. He felt something deeper: compassion, not pity, not moral high ground, but true, heart-centered compassion. He saw his boss cold, rigid, distant, and for the first time, he didn't see a villain. He saw a man trapped in his own shadow. A man who, like Samuel once was likely living in fear of failure, rejection, and vulnerability. A man playing out his unresolved trauma without even knowing it. This is the final, quiet miracle of shadow work. When you embrace your own shadow, you stop projecting it onto others. Before, Samuel had seen enemies where there were merely wounded humans. He took things personally because he hadn't yet faced his pain. But now, with integration came clarity. With clarity came empathy. And with empathy came peace. He no longer needed to be angry, because now he understood. And that understanding set him free, not just from his boss, not just from the past, but from the emotional prisons he had lived in for years. Jung taught that what we hate in others is often what we deny in ourselves. But when we reclaim what we've lost, we can look at the world not with judgment, but with gentleness. Samuel's story is proof of that truth. True peace is not the absence of chaos. It's the presence of clarity. Samuel's transformation didn't make life easier. It didn't remove all challenges or wipe away discomfort, but it changed everything about how he moved through life. Because now, the storms didn't define him. His shadow no longer controlled him. His pain no longer silenced him. His ego no longer made the decisions. He didn't need to manipulate. He didn't need to prove it. He didn't need to hide. That, in the end, is what true healing looks like. Not perfection, not enlightenment, but wholeness. A willingness to see every part of yourself and still stand tall. The call to all of us. Samuel's journey is deeply personal, but it echoes something universal. We all carry shadows. We all wear masks. We all long to be seen, not just by others, but by ourselves. His story teaches us that true mental peace doesn't come from escaping problems. It comes from having the courage to face them without fear. It comes from stopping the war within, because what we run from will always run us. And what we embrace transforms us. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons helpful, please comment on number 5 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. 1. The importance of making the shadow conscious, turning on the light within. Carl Jung's work is grounded in a bold, life-altering truth. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Let that sink in. Most of our suffering doesn't come from what happens around us, but from what we've hidden within ourselves. The shadow, the rejected, silenced, misunderstood parts of us doesn't disappear just because we ignore it. Instead, it lives in the background, silently shaping our thoughts, relationships, and choices. Samuel lived this reality. For years, he believed the world disrespected him, that others were to blame, that life had singled him out for misfortune. But when he finally stopped pointing outward and started looking inward, the truth was undeniable. He had abandoned himself first. He had repressed his anger, denied his fear, disconnected from his desires, and in doing so, he handed over the steering wheel to the unconscious mind. When we bring the shadow to light, we begin to see why we react the way we do. The mystery of our emotional triggers becomes clear. The anger, the jealousy, the shame, they're not flaws. They're clues. If you want to begin this journey for yourself, here's a powerful, eye-opening exercise. Shadow trigger reflection exercise. Think of someone who triggers you emotionally. Maybe they make you angry, jealous, uncomfortable, or frustrated. Write down, in raw and honest words, what exactly about them bothers you. Don't filter it. Don't sugarcoat it. Then ask yourself, is there something about this behavior that mirrors a part of me I've denied, hidden, or feared? It's not always an easy answer. But when we do this sincerely, patterns begin to appear. Maybe you hate arrogance because you were taught confidence was selfish. Maybe you envy someone's success because deep down you feel you've denied your ambition. This practice doesn't just bring self-awareness, it brings freedom, because the moment we recognize our projections, the outside world loses its power to hurt us. 2. The importance of accepting emotions without judgment. Your feelings are not your enemy. From childhood, many of us are taught to fear our emotions. We're told that sadness is weakness, that anger is dangerous, that fear is shameful. So what do? We swallow it, smile through it, distract ourselves, hide. But repressed emotions don't vanish. They bury themselves in our subconscious. And when left unacknowledged, they grow into anxiety, resentment, and emotional exhaustion. Carl Jung challenged that idea radically. He believed that every emotion has a message, a purpose. Emotions are not flaws, they're feedback. Your anger may be showing you where your boundaries were crossed. Your fear may be pointing to a part of you that needs safety. Your sadness may be grieving something you didn't know you lost. Samuel's turning point came when he finally did something bold. He faced his emotions. Instead of running, he sat with them. He wrote down his fears. He said them out loud. And that simple act broke the spell. He no longer had to suppress what he felt, he could honor it. You can do the same. Here's a practice that can change how you relate to your emotions. Emotional acceptance journal prompt. The next time you feel a wave of negative emotion, whether it's sadness, anger, fear, or guilt, don't push it away. Pause, breathe, ask yourself, what am I feeling and why? What part of me is speaking right now? Then write, freely, no judgment, no structure. Just let your emotions speak on paper. Don't try to fix it. Just listen. Just see it. When we write down what we feel without trying to correct it, we remove shame from the process. We allow ourselves to become human, again, whole, flawed, and beautiful. And in doing so, we stop letting buried emotions control our behavior. We stop being afraid of our TS. 3. Disidentifying from the ego to find peace. You are not who you pretend to be. The ego is a shapeshifter. It whispers stories like, I'm successful because I'm needed, I'm strong because I never cry, I'm a good person because I never get angry. It's a mask, a role, a survival mechanism. It helps us fit in. It gives us identity, but it also traps us. Because the moment someone threatens that identity, criticizes us, ignores us, disappoints us, the ego panics. And suddenly, we're no longer acting from truth. We're acting from fear. Samuel had worn his ego like armor. He was the reliable man, the kind man, the one who kept the peace. But inside, he was burning until the mask cracked. That moment when he faced his boss without demanding recognition, that wasn't weakness. That was power. The power of someone who has nothing to prove. So how do we begin to disidentify from the ego? Here's an exercise to help you break the illusion. Ego dissolution reflection. Think of a moment when you felt deeply offended, rejected, or triggered. Ask yourself honestly, what part of my identity felt attacked? Was it my intelligence? My morality? My attractiveness? My strength? Now ask, who am I without that label? If I lose that title, do I lose myself, or do I discover someone deeper beneath it? This is where the ego loosens its grip. When we realize we are not our roles, not our achievements, not our curated images, we finally start to see the self. Not the person we've performed, but the person we truly are. That's where peace lives. Not in pretending to be perfect, but in no longer needing to be. 4. How to face the world without unnecessary emotional reactions. The power of the pause. The greatest test of Samuel's transformation wasn't in his solitude or his journaling, it was in that pivotal moment when he stood face to face with the very man who had once made him feel invisible. His old boss. Before his inner work, Samuel would have reacted as most of us would, with anger, resentment, bitterness. He would have wanted to put his boss in his place, to demand recognition, to finally say, "Now you need me." But he didn't. Instead, he stayed still, calm, grounded. That is when you know transformation is real, not when you talk about peace, but when you choose peace in the face of provocation. This is one of the greatest skills we can develop if we want to live in emotional freedom, the ability to observe before reacting. Emotional maturity is not the absence of emotion, it's the ability to respond with wisdom instead of impulse. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons helpful, please comment number 6 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. You can begin cultivating this ability with a simple practice that can change your life. The pause practice, a tool for emotional mastery. When something triggers you, a harsh word, a dismissive look, an unfair situation, pause. Take one deep breath, feel your feet on the ground. Ask yourself, am I about to respond from my ego or from my consciousness? Don't act right away. Instead, just observe the feeling. If it's anger, name it. If it's sadness, acknowledge it. Let the emotion move through you before you move into action. This single habit, the sacred pause, builds a gap between stimulus and response. And in that gap, you reclaim your power. This is how you begin facing the world with grace, instead of being thrown around by every emotional wave. 5. Compassion as a result of shadow integration, seeing through the eyes of the soul. One of the most beautiful moments in Samuel's journey wasn't when he walked away in strength. It was when he looked at the man who had once caused him pain and felt compassion. Not pity, not forced forgiveness, but a genuine understanding. You're hurting too. You're lost in your own shadow, just like I was. This is the sacred gift of shadow integration. When we've faced our own pain, our own shame, our own fear, we stop seeing others as villains. We begin to understand that most people aren't trying to hurt us. They're just reacting from their own wounds, their own unhealed childhoods, their own repressed emotions. Compassion isn't weakness. It's not letting people walk over you. It's not excusing bad behavior. It's strength. It's clarity. It's freedom. It's the ability to look at someone who once triggered you and say, "This isn't about me.